Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, long before their names were ever spoken outside a single hollow, three siblings were about to change everything. They were known as the Justice Triplets, and their story is so unbelievable, so wildly overlooked, that it's hard to understand how the world never heard it. What happened to these three? How did their lives become one of the most astonishing, almost myth-like tales buried in Appalachian history? Tonight, we're digging into the incredible true story of the Justice Triplets, a tale full of resilience, danger, and twists you'd swear were fiction. Before we jump in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We've got more forgotten Appalachian stories on the way. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love seeing how far this mountain lore reaches. Three identical faces stare back from a photograph taken in 1987. Three boys, maybe 7 years old, standing in front of a white clapboard church in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. Same dark hair, same gap-toothed smiles, same eyes that seem to know something the camera can't capture. By 2003, two of them would be dead. The third would vanish into the hills he came from, leaving behind only questions and a story that law enforcement still won't discuss on the record. This is that story. The town of Harrow Creek, Kentucky doesn't appear on most maps. Population 842 according to the 1990 census. Population 406 by the year 2000. It sits in a hollow so deep that locals say the sun only touches the main road for 4 hours a day, even in summer. The nearest hospital is 43 miles away. The nearest sheriff's station, 27. In the spring of 1980, Martha Justice gave birth to three identical boys in the back bedroom of her family's home on Blackberry Ridge Road. No hospital, no doctor present. Just her mother, Helen Pritchard, and a midwife named Opal Stern, who delivered half the children in Pike County over the previous 30 years. The boys were named Samuel, Thomas, and Daniel Justice, in that order, born 11 minutes apart, start to finish. The midwife would later tell anyone who'd listen that she'd never seen three babies come into the world so quietly. No crying, just three pairs of dark eyes watching. Martha Justice was 19 years old when she had the triplets. She'd grown up in Harrow Creek, the youngest daughter of coal miner Robert Pritchard and his wife Helen. By all accounts, Martha was quiet, kept to herself, spent most of her time reading books from the mobile library that came through once a month. She graduated high school in 1978 with decent grades. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would suggest what was coming. The father of the triplets was never named publicly. Martha refused to say. Her parents never pushed the issue, at least not where anyone could hear. In a town like Harrow Creek, that meant something. People talk. People always talk. But on this particular subject, there was an understanding. A boundary that went unspoken but universally respected. Over the years, there would be speculation, rumors, the kind of dark suggestions that small towns keep alive like pilot lights, always burning, never quite bright enough to see by. But nothing concrete, nothing proven. The Justice triplets were raised in a 2-bedroom house at the end of a dirt road that wound 3 miles up into the mountain. The house had been built by Martha's grandfather in 1947. Tin roof, well water. A wood stove that heated the main room. The boys slept in one bedroom, Martha in the other. The grandparents lived down the mountain, closer to town. By the time the boys were old enough to remember, Martha worked the counter at Pritchard's General Store, the only real shop in Harrow Creek. The store was owned by her uncle, Raymond Pritchard. It sold everything from canned goods to motor oil to hunting licenses. Martha worked 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. The boys would come after school and sit in the back room, doing homework on overturned crates, eating saltines, and drinking RC Cola. The boys were identical in every measurable way. Same height, same weight, same coloring. Teachers at Harrow Creek Elementary had to mark them with different colored wristbands for the first 3 years just to tell them apart. Even their own grandmother admitted she sometimes couldn't distinguish one from another unless they spoke. But they were different. Anyone who spent time with them knew that much. Samuel was the oldest by those 11 minutes. He was the one who spoke first in any group of strangers. The one who answered questions in class. The one who'd look you in the eye and hold your gaze until you looked away. Teachers described him as intense, focused, the kind of child who seemed to be calculating something constantly, running numbers or scenarios you couldn't see. Thomas was quieter. He drew pictures in the margins of his schoolwork. Animals, mostly. Detailed sketches of deer and rabbits and foxes. His third-grade teacher, Linda McCall, still has some of those drawings. She'll show them to you if you ask. The detail is remarkable for a child that age. Every hair rendered individually, every shadow placed with precision. The eyes, especially. The animal's eyes all have the same quality. They're watching something, waiting for something. Daniel was the smallest, though only by pounds, not inches. He laughed more than his brothers. He's the one people remember as friendly, as normal. He played with other children, he told jokes. He seemed lighter somehow, as if whatever weight his brothers carried didn't press on him the same way. The boys were inseparable through elementary school. They walked to school together, a 40-minute trek down the mountain road. They ate lunch together, always at the same table in the cafeteria. They played together at recess, though played might be the wrong word. Mostly they stood together near the tree line, talking in voices too low for others to hear. In 1989, when the boys were 9 years old, something happened that people in Harrow Creek still reference in conversation, though usually without details, as if the specifics might be catching. A boy named Justin Carmichael, age 11, was found at the bottom of a ravine off Blackberry Ridge Road, about half a mile from the Justice House. He was alive but badly injured. Broken leg, broken collarbone, severe concussion. When he was able to speak, he told his parents and later the sheriff that he'd been pushed. He said the Justice Triplets had done it. The boys denied it. All three of them in identical terms with identical inflection. They said Justin had been climbing on the rocks and fallen. They said they'd tried to grab him. They said they'd run to get help. Justin Carmichael's parents wanted charges filed. They wanted something done. But there were problems with the case from the start. No witnesses except the 4 boys. No physical evidence beyond the injuries themselves. And Justin's story changed slightly between the first telling and the second. The first time, he said all 3 boys had pushed him. The second time, he said it was Samuel with Thomas and Daniel watching. The third time, interviewed by Sheriff Wade Garrett, he said he wasn't sure. He said maybe he'd been wrong. He said maybe it was an accident after all. The Carmichael family left Harrow Creek 6 months later. They moved to Pikeville. Justin went to a different school. He'd walk with a limp for the rest of his life. No charges were ever filed against the Justice Triplets. People in town developed habits after that. They'd cross the street when they saw the boys coming. They'd call their own children inside when the Triplets walked by. Nothing overt. Nothing you could point to and call discrimination. Just a collective unconscious pulling away like skin from flame. Martha Justice never commented publicly on the Justin Carmichael incident. She continued working at Pritchard's General Store. She continued raising her sons in the house at the end of the dirt road. If she noticed the way people looked at her boys, she never showed it. Helen Pritchard, Martha's mother, did comment. She told anyone who'd listen that her grandsons were good boys. Misunderstood. She said Justin Carmichael was a troublemaker who'd gotten what he deserved, though she later claimed she'd been misquoted. The boys themselves seemed unchanged by the incident. They continued their routines: school, home, the woods between. They were model students in terms of behavior. They never talked back, never disrupted class, never got into fights. Their grades were good but irregular. Samuel excelled at math, Thomas at art, Daniel at English. Everything else they performed at exactly average levels, as if they'd calibrated their effort to meet expectations without exceeding them. In 1991, when the boys were 11, their grandmother Helen Pritchard died. Heart attack. She was 62 years old. The funeral was held at Harrow Creek Baptist Church, the same white clapboard building from that photograph. The whole town attended, as was custom. The boys sat in the front pew with their mother and grandfather. They didn't cry during the service. They stood at the gravesite without expression as the casket was lowered into red clay earth. That night, someone burned down the Carmichaels' old house, which had been standing empty since the family moved away. The fire department responded, but there wasn't much they could do. The house was fully engulfed by the time they arrived. It burned to its foundation. The cause was ruled undetermined, though the fire marshal noted the presence of accelerant. The Justice boys had an alibi. They'd been at their grandfather's house on the other side of town. Robert Pritchard confirmed it. They'd stayed with him the night of the funeral. He'd made them dinner. They'd gone to bed early. No one was charged with the arson. Middle school presented new challenges. The boys were enrolled at Pike County Middle School, which drew students from 5 different communities. It was a 30-minute bus ride from Harrow Creek. For the first time, Samuel, Thomas, and Daniel were surrounded by children who didn't know them, who hadn't heard the stories, who hadn't learned to keep their distance. This lasted approximately 3 weeks. On September 24, 1991, a 7th grader named Corey Blanton confronted Samuel Justice in the hallway between classes. Witnesses say Corey made a comment about the triplets, something crude about their mother. Samuel didn't respond verbally. He looked at Corey for a long moment, then walked away. That afternoon, Corey Blanton was jumped by 3 boys wearing ski masks in the parking lot after school. He was beaten severely enough to require hospitalization. Fractured jaw, broken nose, 4 missing teeth. The attackers ran off before anyone could identify them. Corey told police he didn't know who they were. He said it happened too fast. He said he never saw their faces. The Justice triplets were questioned. They said they'd been on their bus home. The bus driver confirmed they'd boarded at the usual time. Other students confirmed they'd seen all 3 boys on the bus. No arrests were made. After the Corey Blanton incident, the Justice triplets were left alone at Pike County Middle School. They ate lunch by themselves. They walked the halls by themselves. Other students gave them space. The kind of space you give dangerous animals at the zoo. Respectful distance. The boys seemed content with this arrangement. They didn't seek out social interaction. They didn't join clubs or sports teams. They existed in their own orbit, separate from the larger ecosystem of adolescent life. Their grades remained steady. Their behavior remained exemplary in the technical sense. They were never sent to the principal's office, never received detention, never violated any written rule. Teachers from this period describe them in carefully neutral terms. Quiet, well-behaved, kept to themselves. When pressed for more detail, most decline. One teacher who requested anonymity said this: "They weren't children. They looked like children, but when you were in a room with them, you knew something was wrong. You could feel it. Like standing next to a piece of machinery that's about to fail. That vibration you get right before something breaks." In the summer of 1993, between 7th and 8th grade, something changed in the Justice household. Martha Justice stopped coming to work at Pritchard's General Store. She called in sick twice, then simply stopped showing up. Her uncle Raymond drove up to the house to check on her. He found her sitting on the porch, staring out at the trees. She told him she was fine. She told him she needed time. She didn't say time for what. Raymond Pritchard gave her a month. Then 2. Finally, he hired someone else to work the counter. Martha never came back. The boys continued going to school, they continued their routines. But people who saw Martha during this period say she looked different, thinner, older. Her hair started going gray, though she was only 32. She stopped going to church, stopped going into town except when absolutely necessary. Groceries were delivered to the house by Raymond, left on the porch. The boys would answer the door. They'd thank him politely. They'd take the boxes inside. Raymond never saw Martha during these deliveries. He'd ask the boys how she was doing. They'd say she was fine. They'd say she was resting. They'd close the door. Chotto 4:28, 01:12:19. In October 1993, Robert Pritchard, Martha's father and the boy's grandfather, was found dead in his home. The official cause of death was listed as natural causes. Heart failure. He was 68 years old and had a history of cardiac issues. The funeral was small. Martha attended but didn't speak to anyone. The boys stood on either side of her, 3 points of a triangle, dressed in identical black suits that were slightly too small. Their wrists showed past the cuffs. Their ankles showed above their shoes. They'd grown over the summer, shooting up in that sudden way adolescent boys do. After the funeral, Martha inherited her father's house. She didn't move into it, she didn't sell it. It sat empty, collecting dust and silence. The Justice family finances became a topic of quiet speculation. Martha wasn't working. Robert Pritchard's pension had died with him. There was no obvious source of income, yet the boys continued going to school. The bills apparently were being paid. The property taxes were current. When asked, Martha would say the family was managing. She didn't elaborate. 8th grade passed without major incident. The triplets continued their pattern of attendance and isolation. They turned 14 in the spring of 1994. They were taller now, nearly 6 feet each. Their features had sharpened into the angular architecture of approaching manhood. They were no longer identical in the way young children are identical. Individual differences were emerging. Samuel was broader in the shoulders. Thomas's hands were larger. Daniel's face was narrower, but the core resemblance remained. Someone who didn't know them well would still struggle to tell them apart at a distance. That summer, there were reports of animals being found dead in the woods around Harrow Creek. Dogs mostly, a few cats. One horse belonging to a farmer named Dutch Kellerman. The animals weren't just dead, they were arranged, positioned in ways that didn't happen naturally. In one case, a retriever was found propped against a tree, its head tilted at an angle that suggested it was looking down the trail. Its eyes had been removed. The sheriff's department investigated but found no leads, no witnesses, no physical evidence beyond the bodies themselves. The killings stopped as abruptly as they'd started. By August, people had mostly forgotten. The Justice Triplets were never questioned about the animals. High school began in the fall of 1994. Pike County High School was larger than the middle school, drawing from a wider area. Nearly 400 students total. The Justice Triplets were assigned to the same homeroom. They had different schedules for some classes, same for others. This was the first time in their lives they'd been regularly separated during the day. Samuel took advanced mathematics and science courses. Thomas took art classes. Daniel took literature and history. They each performed well in their chosen areas. They continued to perform at exactly average levels in everything else. Teachers noted that when separated, the boys were more likely to engage with other students. Not in a friendly way exactly, but they'd answer questions if asked directly.